And this is first of all, a session to talk about real quickly our agenda form review, and also to talk about our evaluations and KPIs for our superintendent. Ms. Holly Hassel kindly attached 2 forms that you guys had a chance to look at with the changes for the board director's agenda review. The first one, Director Bettinger took notes and put that on there. And the second one, Karen Howley and Dr. Watson, Lee and I kind of looked at. And I'd like to have an opinion on if you like either of those forms or you have any questions regarding that, first of all.
I don't think I saw the other form, so I am going to look for that.
Yeah.
When was that sent?
It was attached just late yesterday, I believe.
Okay,
Okay.
that's why I didn't see it. Okay.
Can someone share their screen and just show the other form?
Are we talking about the agenda request form?
Yeah.
Okay, I can share that.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Maya.
Sharing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Perfect.
so there are 2. There's this one. And this one.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So do we want to go, which one? Do we want-
That
Use this one first?
That's the one that I list what you said before. So if you scroll to the top, it says whether it's regular, urgent, or time sensitive, and it has more room for description.
Mm-hmm.
And then it also has a place to check off the board goals that we just approved. And so then it's a 2-pager.
Oh, this is
And-
the 1-pager.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it doesn't have a second page?
Yeah, the other one, that's this one. the
Okay.
2-pager.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah. And so then that one has, the outcome, request the item, whatever the item was. That's why I just reiterated it on the second page so that if they got separated, and, whether it was just going to be placed on the agenda right away, or if the board president and secretary requested the board to approve. So, and then the final outcome of that vote, and then there's at the very bottom, there's a date the agenda request was completed to close the loop.
So this first page, the first file doesn't have the board approval, right? Because it doesn't say board approval. It just
Well,
says
no, it's 2 pages. This one is,
there are 2
yeah,
files there.
I don't know how that ended. Yeah, that's just one document with 2 pages.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's because to add more room for the description, which I agree with all these changes. So to add more things, though, it takes more space. So you can't keep it to 1 page. I mean, I could type things smaller, but it's, and then I don't know what the other form is.
Yeah, there are 2, and
Yeah, so
one
open that
says-
one.
well, that's the 1-pager.
Oh, okay,
Right.
that might have been the first one, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well,
Was it the condensed? I'm not sure if that.
the
you open that?
155 would be smaller, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And the major change on that was a suggestion.
That's the 1-pager.
We just, toward the bottom on the approval, where was it? Keep going a little. No, maybe that isn't it. But
That's a
So
single.
this is the 1-pager.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And the change one of the suggestions, we didn't make a change. We just wanted to condense it. And one other thing that we found problematic could be the other form said board approval. So then we'd have to get into everybody agreeing and sending out notes and getting together for that. This form does not have that on it.
Yeah, that's what I
Well,
was saying.
so the only thing I added is, because board meetings are for board work, if the board president or secretary, so that precludes, so with the shorter form, I'm okay with that. But if the board president and secretary are the ones with the ultimate veto power on a board item, I don't
But they're
personally think
not,
that,
they're not though. That's what I'm saying. So you can have an item added by a majority of the board request, or you can
Yes.
have it, so they're not the ultimate veto.
but on the first form without the second page, then they are the ultimate veto.
No. So what'll happen is it could say, okay, so received. Can you go back to the first one, Maya?
Sure.
The one pager.
Mhm.
So what I think would happen is it would say, okay, so reviewed and approved. So approved means, I guess, that it's added to the agenda.
Uh-huh.
So, and
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, so I'm thinking
see.
this is going to be an electronic document, right? So I'm
Right,
thinking
right.
about the signatures and stuff. And if that's really something that's necessary, I mean, it could just say reviewed and approved, because we would all know whether or not it was added to the agenda. So I'm assuming
Mhm.
you would put a request in, and then, Karen would notify us whether or not it could either be approved by the president, or if it wasn't approved by the president, then it could be approved by a majority of the board, but all that would be communicated. So I guess I'm not sure why we need a signature and a date, because it's all done electronically.
Right. It's just,
So-
you can type in your name and the date that you looked at it. I mean, it's just creates a record.
So you could put here reviewed, approved / rejected, and then it can go to the board. I don't know.
I like that. I like that. Maya.
Right.
Yeah, because I know that we were thinking yesterday that if at the top we've got urgent and time sensitive, and if we're going by the two-pager where it says for the board to approve, if something's urgent or time sensitive, there wouldn't be enough time for the
Mhm.
board to approve it.
Hmm.
So, yeah, adding the approved or denied would probably take care of that.
Well,
Yeah.
I guess, so I'm wondering, urgent versus time sensitive, what's the actual difference?
Well, time sensitive is something that expires at a certain point. It's like, if someone's asking a question about, say, food delivery during COVID, well, that's probably more time sensitive, but not urgent than just a regular request on, report on Core 24. And so, there would be a point in time where the point is moot after a while to have a report on the food delivery. And urgent might be, we've had issues where something has come up where a constituent might have written to us, and it's like, we really need to take care of this right away. I added it based on the comments at the last meeting that there should be some designation. So, urgent is we should do it in the next couple days. Time sensitive is we should do it within a board meeting or so. It was my thinking. There's some.
And so I guess my question is, so let's say there's a board member who requests something like, well, I guess my thought is, what if they determine it's urgent, but it's not able to be? Do you know what I'm saying? Because I know sometimes people have wanted answers to things right away, and, it might not be, we might not be able to do it right away, or it might take some time, or what does that look like?
I appreciate the line of questioning, and this is why our work is so fascinating, because something that seems relatively simple is
Can
not
take a
always
long
easy.
time.
Yes,
Right.
and this is good. So I want to add this component from a policy standpoint, so that certainly drives the board's work for the most part. As of May 20th, so proposed agenda policy 1420, the board secretary will be responsible for preparing the proposed agenda for each meeting in consultation with the board chair president/president. Copies of the proposed agenda, minutes of the previous meeting, and I just lost my site. So the proposed agenda, the board secretary shall be responsible for preparing the agenda for each meeting in consultation with the board president. As of April 13th, 2005, the Kent School District implemented the use of the internet to provide access to school board meeting agendas and supporting documents. Complete documentation of agenda materials is available from the Kent School District, and the website is provided. The agenda is available online the Friday evening preceding the school board meeting. Individuals without computers are welcome to use any computer in the school district or local library. Printed copies of the agenda will still be available to any interested citizen of the superintendent's office 24 hours prior to the meeting. Copies of the proposed agenda, minutes of the previous meeting, and relevant supplementary information will be provided to each board member at least 3 days in advance of the meeting and will be available to any interested citizen at the superintendent's office 24 hours prior to. The regular meeting agenda shall include a public comment period at the beginning of the agenda, not to exceed 30 minutes. Comments at the beginning of the meeting will be prioritized by student, staff, and then public. All other comments can occur during the regular comment period at the end of the meeting or during the agenda item period. And so so I guess my wondering is, we're talking about I guess what we're not quite sure is the approval process. Is it the board president, secretary? Is that the question? I guess is that the question that we're answering, the problem we're trying to solve?
There's another policy that speaks to that either the board president can approve it or a majority of the board. So there's two options for it. And I like the one pager. Maybe if we just added requested item, a box that says will be placed on the agenda, or a box that says will not be placed on the agenda. And then, or what that looks like, or, something like that, so that, because I saw your outcomes, I'm just trying to think of how to keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because the outcome, the filling out of that is going to be placed on Karen or whoever else is doing that. Because I'm sure there'll want to be an explanation of why, right? Or the reason why.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if President Hamada fills this part out and says just what you did, accepted or denied, and then provide an explanation to the individual who sent, does it need to go through Karen?
I thought, so that's a good question. So do we send these requests to who? Because I thought it would go probably to Karen, because someone's going to have to communicate it to, so for example, if you had something coming from the technology department, right? If we want to place something on the agenda from the technology department, it's going to have to, at some point, someone's going to have to get that request, connect with the technology department and say, hey, the board is interested in this, so there's a process that they have to be contacted. And I don't know, I mean, that's a good question, because Leslie would have to probably forward it to Dr. Watts or Ms. Howley or somebody to connect with the proper department to get the agenda. You know what I mean? So
Mhm. To even find out what time, when it would be
it could be
reasonable to get it
available,
on the
right?
agenda.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Because
typically what happens is we meet as an executive cabinet, and that would likely be the place, but I want to make sure you have the in-depth conversation, but that would be the most logical.
Yeah, I
first
meant
step.
the outcome, the actual outcome. I realize this has to go to, obviously, to put on the calendar and all that.
Right.
But the outcome itself, wouldn't President Hamada communicate to the individual who submitted that information that it is going in? But I mean, does the whole board need to know if it's accepted? I guess
yeah, I
that's
think that I think it would just go back to the person who made the request, that it's the technology department said they can give that report by the first meeting in December, or the only meeting in December, and so then you would know that that's when you would expect it, and and then it's like, no, we're going to have it go to a board vote. So then you would just say the November 18th meeting is when the board's going to vote on whether we're going to have work session on whether we should put a pool on the roof of the central admin building.
Or
I
it
mean,
can be
I-
it can be a work session though. It'd have to be at
Yeah.
a regular meeting
Right.
if we're
Yeah,
gonna
but
vote
it-
on it.
Yeah. So it's like, so, Director Bettinger wants to ask about putting a pool on the top of the central admin building. And we don't think that, the board president and the board secretary don't think that's a valid use of time, but we're going to put it on the agenda for the board to decide if we should have a work session about putting a pool on the top of the central admin.
Yeah, so
building.
go under discussion and approval.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Because honestly, I don't know if I could find any strategic plan goals that the pool on top of the central admin building would fit.
Engage.
Yeah, there you go.
I'll second that in a hot tub.
So I don't
then
know.
what is-
There's retrofitting, and we'd have to talk to Dave Buzzard.
So then what is the process? I think that's probably, so the process would be, I think we have to figure out what's the process. So a board director has access to this form,
Yeah,
fills it
Fills it-
out.
yeah,
My thought would be send it to copy the president, copy Dr. Watson, copy Ms. Howley, send it
Yeah.
to,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
that's the way I see it. Yeah.
Yeah. And when do you have your executive cabinet meetings, Dr. Watts? Is that like every other week or?
No. At least 3
Lately,
times.
it's
We
probably
meet
daily.
Monday
Yeah,
Thursday.
yeah.
and Friday.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we could also, if you wanted to, you could put, a note on here too, to just remind. So, if someone sent it on a certain day, like you can't send this the day before a board meeting and expect it to be, most likely it's not going to appear on the next board meeting. So it's, if we want, you could also add, please, I mean, I think we all understand that it needs more time than 24 hours to review and things like that. So
Sure.
again, it's just a reasonable length of
Mhm.
time, and just to make sure that, there's a system in place, an equitable system where, and it's hopefully a thoughtful system where you're looking at what goals we're trying to support in seeking the information.
And the nice thing is we can try it. And if it doesn't work, we can tweak
Sure.
it. I mean,
Mhm.
so we can just try it and see what happens. See
Yeah.
how it goes.
Well, I'm thinking about
Yeah.
access too, because
That's
if
what
the
I was
form
gonna ask.
is not located in a place where each board member, so it might, it seems like we would be working backwards if you would have to, communicate with me or Karen to say, here's the form to start the process. So
Mhm.
you do have access to SharePoint, to your
Yeah.
team site. So we can place the document there,
Mhm.
and
Yep.
that could be the starting point.
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay, so I hear a plan that we're going to accept this with the one change of or the one pager, and we were going to make one change down here to approved or rejected, right? Is that what I heard?
Yeah. And then if it's rejected, it would come to the board for a vote.
Okay. And is that the consensus I'm hearing from everybody? All
I
right,
think
then
so. Mhm.
that we can put this on our next board meeting for approval on the 28th. We can add that to the agenda, okay? Hey, we finished in 20 minutes. Okay. So on to the evaluation process. Oops, lost you. Minute.
I just got the share. Do I need to still share? There's nothing.
I'm
I
just
don't-
curious. So I see Karen's
Oh.
on here and she's silent. Karen, do you have thoughts about it? Because you're the one who kind of manages this process a little bit.
She has certainly been a participant. So
Yeah. Do you have thoughts about this, Karen, or the process?
The thoughts about that, I'm in agreement. It should be on the Board of Trustees team site.
Okay.
And I was just printing the copy so I could add the note that you just said about accepted, rejected. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Does the process seem okay to you, or is there something, because I know you facilitate a lot of this, so you might have some inside knowledge that we don't.
I think the discussion was that it would be sent to Dr. Watts, President Hamada, and I would be copied.
Mhm.
Is that what we
Mhm.
just want to confirm that that's what I heard?
Mhm.
Yes.
And I do believe, yes, it would then go to executive cabinet. And especially, for example, your example given for IT, Dr. Harmon, because that falls under her area, under her community, she'd be the one to reach out to her team to make sure that that was something they can do, and a timeline, when can this be done? So I think that seems reasonable.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Thank you. Yeah.
So, and we'll try it, and I think we'll just continue to provide feedback and how it's working, or if there are challenges, we'll work through those as well.
Yeah, I think the only challenges I see is when it's an agenda item that's not going to executive cabinet. So for example, if we wanted to get a report from the CFAC, right, that wouldn't go through that channel.
Mhm.
That would be a different channel that it would
Right.
go through. So just thinking about, there are different places, or different, if we wanted to hear a report from, the any of the outside organizations that we work with, right, that are working with our kids, if we wanted to get hear information about that, those types of things,
Mhm.
And that
might be
probably,
a little different.
it might be different. I think it would likely start in the same area.
Mhm.
Someone in executive
Yeah.
cabinet would have those connections. So,
Yeah.
no, I appreciate that. We have to be thinking about it. I'm sure there'll be something else that'll come up that
Yeah.
will cause us to reflect on that.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Halley, for all the work you did on helping me, put that together tonight too, and the corrections. I appreciate that.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen.
Mhm.
All right, so we're on to superintendent evaluation goals and key performance indicators. And Dr. Watson, I just
Yes.
had a brief conversation, and I think he wants to talk first about this. Am I correct in how we were going to go about this?
Oh, certainly. I have 3 documents. And first of all, I want to thank you for your patience. And certainly this is an incredibly important, one of the many important aspects of your role and our role as a governance team. But what I will say is that the documents that we have here, one is for context. So I've provided last year's document that I used for evaluation of 2019-2020. And second is the version for 2020-21 to share with you what my thoughts were and my vision for this evaluation, and what some of the differences you might have wonderings or curiosities. I'll be happy to speak to those. And I've also provided the third document, which supports my PDF as well. This is the rubric that was used for 2019-2020, which I would recommend that we continue, but certainly this process is for your review and for your feedback. This is a consensus building activity. And so just to bring us back to where we were, if we look at goal 1, and Maya, are you sharing? Is this?
Yes, can you
Okay.
see? Okay.
You're fine. I just wanted to make sure I'm okay. So if everyone can see, taking a look at the first goal. So goal 1, prepare students for college career readiness. You see this is the goals that are listed, and on the column on the far left are the key performance indicators. In years past, or the most recent evaluations, we've used third graders on track, percentage of students proficient in math and reading. This is a perfect example when we transitioned to remote learning. At that point in my PowerPoint presentation, I provided math and not reading, and that was an oversight. So we're making sure that that is a part of our next evaluation. The goal may read a little bit differently. The other key performance indicator was 10th graders on trackness, which, as we've described, percentage of students obtaining 9 credits by the end of the first semester and 12 credits by the end of 10th grade. So any question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, continue. I have a question.
Okay. Wait, you want me to continue, or you have a question?
Well, if you're moving on from these to go to the next, then I have a question. If you're staying on these for now, then
Okay.
I'll wait till you're done.
Okay. I'll just a remind of our 4 areas of evaluation, from unsatisfactory to distinguished. And for 2021, I have kept those as the 4 indicators, and the descriptions of what unsatisfactory means and what basic, proficient, and distinguished means are at the top. I did not include those in the most recent rubric, but that would be the standard that I would recommend for 2021. And moving to
Okay.
goal 2.
So did you have a question about this one,
Director
Michelle?
Benjer, did you want to, before I move to goal 2? Yes.
So to clarify, because you have 2 documents here. So these are the KPIs you want to use again this year, or the KPIs in the new document?
Just reviewing the KPIs that we used for 1920.
Okay.
Correct.
So, so when you look at the indicators, okay, the last one, the one we were just on.
Yes.
So report on 4-year cohort graduation rate, target increase by 3%. Is there going to be a starting number? Because
It's the graduation rate. It's the current graduation rate of the last year.
okay, so the last one that was measured that's on the OSPI is the 84%. So the increase is increased by at least 3%. So 87% is what you're shooting for?
Yes, as a matter of fact. And so what I appreciate is the question that you're asking is for the current performance evaluation metric. What I wanted to, and I apologize if I wasn't clear, I was planning just to rehash or share with you the document from last year, just to give context. And then I was going to begin with that.
Okay.
But to answer your question, yes, that's when I do speak further, that's exactly what the metrics are supposed to accomplish. I don't have all of the metrics. Part of it is I wanted to provide opportunities for us to discuss, to see if that makes sense, if you have questions or wonderings. But that 3% is a typical standard. I also would offer to you that I am very open, and I believe in the idea of stretch goals as well. I also know that we are in a year that is not normal.
Right.
And so I never want to use that as an excuse. At the same time, I also know that that is a factor that we have to keep into consideration.
And Dr. Watts, perhaps this is not the time for me to ask this question, but I'm going to ask it because this is the thing that has been kind of mulling over in my mind.
Sure. With
all our different variables this year, and actually half of last year. I'm not sure how, I mean, for me, it would be hard to get to some really concrete results because of the circumstances are so different. So I'm wondering, if, let's say we would use this with a 3%, which is natural, I mean, are a good indication for growth. How can we compare that to our learning situation? Because it's got, whether we want to admit it or not, it's got to be very different right now in these classrooms and the learning situation. And I'm just not sure. I mean, that's what's bothering me a little bit is how do we factor into, we're in a whole different situation.
So I don't want to answer a question with a question, but how would we, and what expectations that we have for our children, have they changed as a result of our current pandemic?
I would think so.
No, I wouldn't think so.
And the
Well,
only reason
I
I
don't
ask,
think
go
I
ahead.
wouldn't think so. Just because I think that learning is happening. I think now what I would do though, I would change some of the KPIs. So for example, with the third grade reading level, I know we're not doing SBA this year, right? So that's not even a valid assessment to use. So we're going to have to figure out how we can measure using some of the other
Correct.
other types of measurements. So I think we could change some of them, but I do think we should have some specific to learning. I think that our kids, I think that's, we're in education. I mean, and then I think the graduation rate's appropriate. I mean, I think that we should definitely, will it be different? Yes. But does that mean that our kids aren't going to graduate or are not learning? No.
Will
So
we have the graduation rate measure for 2021 by the time we do the evaluation, the final evaluation
Still
in
getting,
June?
yes, we should. We're still getting preliminary numbers in, and OSPI has not finalized those data yet, but we should certainly by at least by one of our quarterly, but certainly by our final.
at the final.
So-
Mhm.
So I guess my question is the graduation rate we would be measuring would have been last year's.
Correct.
It would be the 1920 graduation rates, not this year. And last year was its own kind of different, and this year is going to be a different kind of different. So is there, but based on our evaluation schedule, there, you know, we can have a measurement for it, but if we're not going to have the data until say, you know, September, October, November of the following evaluation period, then is that even that's not an achievable, we're not able to measure that. The 2021 graduation rate, which is essentially what we're doing, because, you know, this evaluation is for July through June, you know, July 2020 through June 2021. So, you know, that there will be there's nothing we can do now to impact those scores in this school year. And, you know, prior to this session, I reviewed my notes from when Colleen Miller presented on this in 2018 here at the district, and when Tricia Lubach presented last November on an evaluation. And that's one thing they both talk about is just measurements and making sure you have those measurements. So the four-year cohort graduation rate is a very important measure, and that's on our strategic goals for a specific reason. And it is something that we should look to and we should celebrate when it's good, and we want it to go up and increase by 3%. But we're not going to be able to evaluate the 2021 cohort in this evaluation period. So I guess that's where I have concerns on some of these indicators. If there's no measurement that's going to occur for these students in this period of July 2020 to June 2021.
And I appreciate that, Director Bettinger, and to each and every one of you, as I reflect on this process, this is also an opportunity for teaching and not just telling, that there is two types of indicators. There are leading indicators and there are lagging indicators. So leading indicators are those indicators that when the impetus or the action that is taken occurs prior to the end or final evaluation, we can look at it, we can reflect on or evaluate those indicators and see to what degree they led to the outcome that we desire, thus graduation rate. So there would likely be leading indicators for reading or the amount of time spent on course performance or what have you. That said, because we're measuring it at a certain time period, it's still a leading indicator, but it's in a different year. So technically, we're looking at what is now it's referred to as a lagging indicator.
Mm-hmm.
So if we chose to evaluate it just as you've mentioned, Director Bettinger, and it makes perfect sense, we're always going to be a year behind. Technically, we'd never be able to evaluate graduation rate because it's always going to be at the end of, and that's due in large part, not because of what the students are doing, how they're performing, but the degree to which OSPI takes the time and it takes a great deal to process that information.
Yeah.
So my recommendation would be to continue to keep that, but know that it was an example of class of 2020, not 2021. But the goals, the identified areas are cohort graduation rate for 4-year, 5-year, and what we're also looking at. So this is where we get into my nerd out moment. We looked at this my first year here, and we've not been able to cycle back, but it's called a data project, student data project, and it's out of Harvard University. They have created this data warehouse, and essentially they're able to monitor, for the most part, students who have an identifying number, their persistence after graduation, if they attend a post-secondary institution. And so we had intended to monitor student persistence beyond graduation in Kent School District, because just like what we said, students who perform well in 3rd grade reading, that's an indicator for success beyond elementary school. Students who persist beyond 2 years in college, generally that is a strong indicator of college completion and success in career, the workplace. So that's one reason why the 3rd indicator is there. That's still, it's not yet finalized. So I would put an asterisk by that, but that's something that we are looking very closely at so that we can get to that challenging question you've asked. How do we monitor for this current class going
So
forward?
Dr. Watts, I know in the past, well, this is every year, but
Yes.
you know, we get information as of June 30th or graduation date, what it looked like, and then how many and the percentage of students who are set to graduate through extra studies during the summer.
Right.
And then here's the progress of
And
where we
scrubbing the
are.
data. Yes, absolutely.
So we have looked at it in chunks, you know, like
Yes.
analyzed it throughout the years. So we can certainly do that here as well.
Because the cohort model is it does allow us to do that. Even though time continues, all of those students still count for the same cohort. And so it does make it an equal, dare I say, an equitable process.
Or is there a way to use the lagging indicators? So once you have the information to create a SMART goal around the lagging indicator. So once you have the graduation rate, for your cohort graduation rate for the class of 2020, then, is there a way to have a SMART goal, like a plan and implementing a plan? And, I'm not sure of the workflow, but is it better then and more measurable to have a goal around the lagging indicator, like putting a plan in place for the next year's graduating class to examine some of the problems if they did poorly, or some of the successes if they did well, and replicate the positive, the positive work that was done, because graduation rates are, without plans and purpose, it's like throwing spaghetti at a wall to see if it sticks, right? And so I think when I think about our students, the numbers are great, but just understanding, what we can replicate for success, it to me is a bigger win. The numbers might not be great next year because of what happened with COVID, but if you take that lagging indicator and you're able to create a future plan to try and replicate some of the successes from previous plans, because I'm assuming there's a plan every year when you get the numbers to, replicate what worked and, a SWOT analysis or whatever. so is it possible with these goals to have, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, timely goals related to some of these lagging indicators to show, forward progress? Because I would hate for a goal, a target increase by 3%, but half the year the kids were out of school, and they were in remote learning. So
I think we have to be careful though and consider what our role is. And our role is to develop the what, not to evaluate the how. And so I think that that's something that we have to be careful about, because I don't think it's our place to get into evaluating plans and processes necessarily. I think that gets too far into, I don't think that's the board's purview. Again, ours is the what. So our goal, our job is to set the goals, to say, okay, this is what we want to see.
mm-hmm.
And then the how is then done. Now, I think that there's definitely, if we want to ask Dr. Watts to share, okay, great. So, we had 84% this year.
Yeah.
We know that it may drop because of the situation. And maybe talk about, how to share information about what the recovery or, what's going to be done different. I don't think it's the place of it's in the evaluation though.
Okay, so that's an interesting idea. I completely understand about the what, but if the board says we want there to be a plan for our graduates, that takes into account their graduation rates, and I'm not specifying a plan, but I would, as a board director,
is that a SMART goal though?
Having a plan that you measure different aspects. Just if you presented a plan to me and said, I'm looking at what happened with graduation last year, and that was our first year with the, maybe something new happened, and so we implemented X, Y, and Z, and then for this kind of success. I just want to see. I always think it's important that there is a plan for every bit of learning that happens in this district. And so to see the plan, to assess the efficacy of the plan, can be a SMART goal, but you have to see the plan first. So that's step one. Do you have a plan? We want you to have a plan. Here's the plan so we can measure. So yeah, you did. You have a plan, and then did you implement the plan?
Part of the evaluation though. That's provided to us like during presentations. Like for example, when the Plan, Do, Study, Act, right? That is a method of achieving, educational achievement, right? Be it reading, whatever that looks like. So that is a plan, but it's not what we would evaluate on. It's a plan because that's the how. We evaluate on the what. So we are shown those things often. So I guess I'm not sure.
No,
I think you're getting too much into the weeds with it.
So if I may, because I nerd out on this all the time, and I appreciate these conversations for all sorts of reasons. One is, and I remember Director Benjer, I remember you were asking a similar question, which is what we ask ourselves: how do we know? And when we see an outcome, good, bad, or indifferent, how do we know? How do we get there? And that question is, in education, like any other people business, is not always easy to answer. So I just wanted a clarifying question. When you said a plan, Director Benjer, were you referring to a plan for every student, or you were saying an overall or overarching plan to focus on improved graduation rates? Is that
so? If our graduation rates in a non-COVID year drop by 12%, that would obviously be something that the board would say, this is what we want to happen. We want that to increase. And so I think that it would be reasonable in a situation like that not only does that increase if we drop by 12%, but that there would be a plan presented that said, okay, we figured out that this is what happened, and so this is these things we put in place. Like when you talk about the social emotional learning, you have a plan. We saw the plan. We went to a work session. We've seen the plan step by step. So I guess, sometimes, especially with a lagging indicator and with no real knowledge, honestly, again, I'm going to dwell on this because this impacts our students from 7th grade to 12th grade is the Core 24. With Core 24 requirements, it changed some of the requirements for graduation, like adding language and an arts credit and things like that. So having not seen that plan, I don't know how that, there should be a plan. And seeing that plan and then saying, okay, that, we increased graduation by 3% with this plan, or graduation dropped by 12% by that plan. So then you have that opportunity to look at how we worked the plan. And then obviously, I think staff would be working to figure out how we drop graduation rates so dramatically, or if we increase them dramatically, it might be the opposite. There's always room for improvement, but just having a plan is step one. And there are certain things in the strategic plan, when I read it, that are these measures. I mean, I reviewed the strategic plan yesterday and today, and there's so many things that are measures, but I don't see it. And I don't believe I've ever, witnessed a meeting that goes through the plan of how to achieve those measurements and those numbers. So, the percentages should inform the work and what we're doing to support students if they go up or down. If they go up, then it's like, what did we do right? So we can continue doing it. So they'll continue going up. If they go down, then it's like, okay, what do we need to change to improve that? So,
That's exactly what we do. Yeah.
So,
Just not
So
in the
during,
evaluation, right.
during the evaluation, Dr. Watts is
Yes.
presenting information to support, mid-year, he'll present what is happening to gauge and monitor that particular indicator. So I understand what you're saying, Director Bettinger, and I think that's the opportunity for Dr. Watts to present supporting evidence of what we're doing to increase the 3%. Also to talk about where we fell short and what are we doing to address that. Those are the questions we bring up as it relates to the evaluation during the mid-year process. We did have 4, that was a good time to, like the quarterly ones, to kind of understand what the progress is. With only 2, we're going to have to expect
Accelerate.
Dr. Watts to address quite a bit mid-year.
And just going back to the report on 4-year cohort graduation rate for the class of 1920, are we going to increase by 3%, or do we want to be just for the last measurement, the 84%, we were 3.9% higher than the state average. So in this year of COVID, would it be more reasonable to measure against the state average so that we're higher than, and maybe is the goal higher than the state average? Or is the goal higher than the 84% we achieved, at the end of for the class of 2018? That's why it's important to be specific on measures, because again, with COVID, there's a potential that the target number is going to be down for every district in the state. And, so that's why it's important to be specific on what we really are measuring. Some years it might be more reasonable to measure against the state averages, and some years maybe against our own personal best.
No, I appreciate that. And that's why, and to that point, from a performance standpoint, it is usually best practice to measure one's performance against one's own performance, but not in a vacuum. And as you've noted, when we communicate our graduation rates, for example, we communicate them based on how we're performing against ourselves in previous year or the previous class. We also disaggregate by student group. And so how are our students who have an active IEP, inclusive ed, how are they performing? How are our Black and Brown students performing? And we compare those to each and every year. I can certainly add those, but from a graduation rate cohort, from the first blush, if we're comparing ourselves typically to ourselves. That also leads me to part of that post-secondary. I'm a big fan of comparing ourselves to those, what we call, we compare ourselves to our peer districts, our districts that are near us, that probably look more like us in terms of student demographics. I'm also a big fan of comparing ourselves to creating a stretch goal to those school districts that may be outperforming us in some way. And that can help us determine some different strategies to improve our outcomes, but that wouldn't necessarily be in the actual goal. I think that's one of the reasons why I'm excited about the fact that we are going to have multiple opportunities to have discussions about this evaluation. That's where I would bring in those data that are appropriate and available. As Director Bettinger, Vice President Daniels mentioned, we still are waiting. Now, we know that politics does play a role in evaluation, unfortunately, in public education. And so far, we have been given the message that there will not be a waiver this year. So right now, as we speak, we are preparing for SBAs, and as our smarter balances, they must be administered at least 12 weeks within the school year, no earlier than April 12th, no later than June 5th. If that changes, certainly that's likely the case. But other than that, we won't have any other metrics other than our local, like iReady for elementary, or other metrics for performance. So we may have to be creative. And that's part of how I started. This is a year of change. So I know this may not look the same as we move closer to the end of the year. Vice President Daniels, what were you going to say?
Nothing. I'm just
Okay.
dotting the green.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I saw. Okay. I saw that
Yeah,
the
so
yellow.
it would be helpful to see how OSBI recommends
Mhm.
that districts measure progress.
Yeah, we're probably not going to get that.
I was going to say, have you seen that? Because I haven't seen anything like that.
No.
Well,
Typically,
no, I'm not saying they'll do it now.
Oh,
I'm
later,
just saying
yeah.
that they're going to. I
Yeah.
mean, districts are going to ask,
Absolutely.
how.
Right.
we asked. Actually, we had an opportunity to speak to him today. Didn't get much feedback about that, but we'll keep
Election year.
asking. I know. Yeah.
Well, the thing that really troubles me is the variables of teaching, and I disagree with Vice President Daniels. We can expect the moon and we can want to have kids have their very best and have the same outcomes as before, but there is just no dispute. Things are different emotionally for kids. Things are different for parents. And I was on a session with some seasoned teachers, not in this district, but they had me in their conversation talking about they're exhausted and they're only starting out and they're seasoned teachers. And a couple of them are pretty computer tech. So picking all this up, it has that part of it but their workload seems to be twice as much. Their stress load, even with their home situations, has been twice as much. All of that plays a factor in the end results. And how fair is that to compare to other years? I mean, that's the variable that I don't understand how to measure, because we are if you're conducting an experiment, you have to keep the variables the same. Our variables are not the same to get the outcomes to be the same. And that's the thing that I'm struggling with, is because to me, the most important thing for our littles, because I've been on there with these classes and these kids are bouncing on and off and their parents are calling in. And I mean, it's not a natural classroom setting, and they're trying their best. The kids are, the parents are, the teachers are. So that's going to factor into the learning factor, whether we like it or not. So I'm not sure. I mean, this really bothers me, how we can effectively keep going with the same type of data that we've used in the past. So I don't have the answer to this. I've been reading a lot and I haven't come up with it yet. So
Well,
I
and
mean,
appreciate
certainly
that.
not punitive. I feel like it's, something that we can set an expectation. This is where we want to be. There's nothing wrong with that. But, it's not a year that we can actually use quote unquote smart goals.
that's what I'm
And
struggling with.
yeah, but the expectation should be there regardless. We need to try and beat our best efforts in previous years. But if we don't meet it, then yes, I agree, Director Benninger. I think there needs to be a plan on how do we address the COVID part of it, but also beyond that, how do we provide the additional necessary supports
Right.
to bring our students to standards. So
Well,
I don't know. I think the 3%, is it achievable? Maybe, maybe not. But I don't think there's anything wrong in setting a goal this year
yeah.
that
Well,
is unknown.
I appreciate that, Director Venkatasalam, and President Ahmad, I appreciate your sharing that. I'm a sports fan too, as well as an educator, and I think about teams that have injuries every year, and there are some that have many more injuries than others. They're still held to the same standard, the same expectation, and they may not have the same outcomes, but they can point to the reasons why they may have performed at a lower rate than in previous years. I look at it in a similar way. We have some challenges that we didn't necessarily see coming. We didn't have a great deal of time. No one went to school. I know I didn't. No one went to school to learn how to lead in the midst of a pandemic. It's something that we're learning as we go. But I would offer this as another way of looking at it. Before the pandemic, we had gaps. We have gaps now.
Yeah.
But we had gaps before the pandemic. We had huge gaps before the pandemic, and we were able to, with strategies and systems that we articulated and that we put in place, to close some of those gaps. Not completely and not all, but we've made progress. So I would not want us to limit. So let's be honest. While there are some individuals I know, and probably quite a few more, who may be struggling right now, I'm seeing and hearing from families who are also saying they're seeing their children and the adults who are serving them are making strides. This is not normal. I'm going to say that. So I'm not apologizing for any performance that's not happening or saying that performance that's overwhelming is because of the pandemic. I'm not saying that either. But I think if we don't keep our expectations at least to a reasonable level, to me, that's sending a very different message. And I heard Director Venkatasalam say what I'm feeling. This should never be punitive. It should be about growth and performance, and then developing that plan, as we've said, when we're not reaching our goals. So we'll continue to monitor. I didn't put draft on this, but obviously imagine this should be a draft. We'll finalize once we hear from each of you. But this is part of the process. And I know we're in this together. We are. But I do want us to keep our expectations at a reasonable standard. And I'll stop there. Other questions or feedback?
no, I mean, just, any goals we vote on, I'm going to want to see what we're measuring, what the starting number is, and then the 3% increase. So if we're measuring against, that first goal that was just there about 4-year graduation, if we're measuring against our highest year, our highest year, I think, was 87% total, then that would be 90%. If we're measuring against the 2018 year, then that would be 84. then 3% would be 87. I don't know what, I just want to be able to be very clear what, if we say a 3% increase, what the starting number is that we're going for, so we can see it, and then, that
Okay.
it's very clear. So,
Yeah. The assumption
that-
was 3% was from the previous class. That if that's what you're asking.
2018. Yeah.
2019, right?
Well, we
2019.
haven't, what's on OSPI is just the 2018 graduation rate, which was total 84%. They have, I'm sorry, the 2018-19 year.
Correct.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes,
2019.
2018-19 year. So that's 84%. And so we're hoping that 19-20 would be 87% or higher.
Yeah.
And then,
Easy for us to monitor just by using that spring number. We just call them the class of 19, and then
yeah, and again, just for clarity, and it's just easier if you go class of this percentage and increase by 3%, because also with the state measures for total state measures for English language, we're under the state by like 3.4% in ELA. We're under the state by 2.8 in math. We're under the state by 3.6 in science. So,
is that
I'm
for all students, are you
for
saying?
all students, yeah. So I'm just wondering too, if we want to we have measures in the strategic plan that coincide with some of those state measures too. And again, it's pretty consistent across the board. In many cases, we're like 3 to 4% to percentage points under the state average. So again, it's like, just being clear that whether we're measuring against ourselves or if we're measuring against the state or both.
The hard part with measuring against the state is you're going to assume they keep going up. And so it's going to be a continuum of trying to catch up. So that's why my thought is why we typically measure against ourselves. So that could be a potential of not ever to reach, or it could take a series of cycles before that happens. So I don't know how reasonable that goal would be. So I think that's...
I agree. And I also think what Dr. Watt said, that I think we have to look at our surrounding districts, the different demographics that we have, and the diversity that we have, ELLs, and we have to look at those demographic data.
Right.
That's where I think our neighboring districts, the roadmap region, we used to do that, really look at roadmap region statistics and compare it against that. But those are all information I think that can come to us, and we can look and see how we're doing well. But for the purpose of evaluation, I would think we would want to evaluate against our own.
Ourselves. Yeah.
Well, and then I have a question. So instead of, saying a hard number, like 3%, can we give a range? Because I feel like since we don't know, since there's so many things that are still left up in the air, if we give ourselves a range of percentages that we could still be safe in between, maybe that would be better. I mean, Director Van de Gosselin said, this is not punitive, but at the same time, it would be concerning that people would say, oh, well, you guys aren't doing what you're supposed to because you didn't hit this hard number. But if we had, like I said, 2 or 3%, then, and we're in the middle in between that we would still be hitting the goal and it would still be good.
Do you have a suggestion? A range?
Yeah, I think we could also, the reality is just like the state is doing everybody else. We could put there's a COVID asterisk for everything that's happening right now. So, I think we have to understand that everything has a COVID asterisk right now. And so, understanding that that's this year and next year, that's really going to be a reality for everybody.
No doubt. No.
Well, then should we go back further to goals that were like in the 2017-18 year? Because this is a year where, the strategic plans ends at the end of this year. Should we have goals that are just, reviewing, our success to date to the strategic plan, because we have data through, 2018-19 school year, and then we have the strategic plan, and it has lots of measures. So we could, one of the first performance evaluation tools I saw for the superintendent was just, the creating the strategic plan. Is it time to just have that goal is just measuring the strategic plan? Because before we can even begin to think of starting a new strategic plan, you've got to evaluate the measures and how well we did. And there are some of them, they have the specific metric of increasing by 3% over year to year, things like that, like the suspension and expulsion rates, so should
And that's a perfect example of what will be different this year. Yeah.
Right. So if all of
Right, exactly.
right.
I think that's a great goal.
But what I'm saying, but if you look at that goal over the past 4 years, we haven't achieved it. It says reduced by 0.3% annually. We 2 years we reduced it by 3%, and then we increased it by 3, and then it went down again. So it's gone all over the place. So, again, I spent a lot of time with the strategic plan because that's a lot of these measures come from the strategic plan. So I wanted to be familiar.
Yeah. Have you found any areas where we have improved that you'd like to at least make sure we continue?
I was looking at the OSPI report card. And so a lot of these, I don't know where the baseline data came from. So I was only going from the OSPI report card. So the graduation rate is the one that's higher than the state standard, and that we've again, graduation rates, we've done this too, up and down. So yeah, but
No, I appreciate that.
It's, if all of these are going to be so deeply impacted by COVID, which I think every district might be struggling with this, maybe there's other goals we want to look at, like the strategic plan, or, there's other things to be measured in the work, as long as it's, making sure that what we're doing is successfully preparing all students for their futures. That's why we're here. That's the key. So
I do think we can do that, and we should do that. We should assess how we did with our strategic plan, because a lot of those goals are both in board goals as well as in superintendent goals last year. And I think, that would be, we can just put that under the effective organizational systems, because it pretty much covers all 4 goals, our strategic plan. And so I don't know if we want to make that a specific goal 5, or I don't know. We didn't finish what you were suggesting.
These
here.
were last year. So
those
actually,
were last year.
No.
So I was talking about
here.
like a couple
This one.
before, when Dr. Watts first started, that was obviously one of his goals, was creating the strategic plan. So, okay, you're going too fast.
No. I'm just saying this is Dr. Watts, which is only 3 goals here.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'll explain the 4. So if you look at the goals themselves, the first, what I tried to accomplish here was to align our goals. So in light of what we've just talked about, aligning our goals based on our core values: equity, excellence, community. And so goal 1 would certainly be, and I didn't list them, but you could actually create just a parenthetical note. And goal 1, increasing student performance, involves equity. It involves excellence. It certainly involves community, because we cannot do this by ourselves. With the description that as superintendent, I serve as a primary instructional leader. Obviously, I don't do this work by myself, and with staff and supports and guidance and governance by our board. The goal is to ensure that we improve student achievement and performance for all of our students. So really combining, so my goal was to thinking about this year as COVID year, combining some of our goals and creating really 3 power goals that included: 1, increasing student performance. The first indicator was ensuring all students are college and career ready upon graduation. And that was the rationale for reporting on 4-year cohort as well as 5-year cohort. So this year, obviously we would be speaking to 2 classes. So those students who didn't graduate or qualify for graduation in the 4-year cohort last year, class of 2020, would be part of possibly class of 21 if they achieved those credits. How we do that, so to answer that question, our data processors, our counselors, our principals, building administrators, our teachers are and should be in constant communication with students and families, making sure, so part of Core 24, as we've discussed, it is no longer just about the number of credits. It is most importantly about the coursework and the course performance within that 24 credits. So we have to make sure that our students know exactly when they're enrolling for courses, that they're taking the appropriate courses. And that's what we found. Not a Kent specific, but this is a nationwide issue. It's making sure that we're being mindful and having adult support, helping our students choose the right courses and enroll in them. Second, to ensure mastery of curriculum. Yes, we have our board supported advisory committees, the instructional materials committee. We have our teaching and learning team, curriculum and instruction, our teaching and learning community, our teaching and learning, our curriculum and instruction teams. We've mastered the art of plan, do, study, act. We're continuing to improve that notion of continuously monitoring our data. And just as you've described, this is a perfect example. Our PDSA, or plan, do, study, act, is exactly what this evaluation cycle should be about. When we've fallen short, we look at the reasons most associated or clearly understood. Why did we fall short? When we succeeded, we looked at some of the reasons that were closely aligned to why we achieved success and how might we replicate them. But we can't just keep doing the same thing, because every year, guess what? We have new students, we have new teachers, we have a new curriculum, and that's why this work is so complex. The easy question to ask is, what did we do differently? And I understand why that question is asked. You should be asking that. The harder question to answer is, what did we do differently? And how do we know that it worked? And that's part of our next challenge in this COVID environment. Student achievement reported on state assessments. That will be a what if factor associated with that. So what specific assessments will we be taking and when will we know? Student achievement reported on state assessments for students 3 through 8 or 9 through 12. And then third, development and implementation of school improvement plans, which we'll be presenting obviously each year. But that will also be an answer to the question, what did we do to make sure that our students had what they need when they needed it? Part of that, what did we do, is our annual ongoing implementation and monitoring of our school-based strategic, or excuse me, our school-based school improvement plans. Third, to identify, implement, and support intervention and acceleration programs. That's where the equity conversation comes into play. So for our language learners, we have EL programs. Certainly we have for students who may need social emotional support. Our project Mr. That we are closer than we've ever been, still working on identifying students at Kent Lake. And as we continue to move closer with African-American male achievement and Kingmakers, those are acceleration or intervention programs or examples of those that we can provide as an indicator, a proof point, and see how this impacts our students in a positive way, ideally. Reporting the number of students on track to graduate. And I think we talked about this last year. I want to make sure that's part of the leading indicator. If I've taken half the number of and passed half of the number of credits, 12, needed for me to be eligible to graduate in another 2 years as a sophomore, then that means I'm on track to graduate, all things being equal. Now, something can happen next year, but all things being equal, I'm halfway through my high school graduation, high school career, and I've attained half of the credits. So that means I would be on credit. The goal is that we want 100% of our 10th graders in every class to be on track for graduation.
So this one, number 3, that is specifically for students, intervention and acceleration program. So that would be for, like you said, so for that goal, can we specify that that is to make sure that we're closing the achievement gap for our, you know, our students of color, our IE students? Is that what you're intending with that goal 3?
Well, it could be, but what I'm saying is that every student, in some way, shape, or form, every student, if they're below grade level, so I appreciate the question, an intervention typically means that I've not mastered the concept.
Right.
In some way, shape, or form. So I might need some additional support, some reteaching. There are other students who might have mastered the concept, and perhaps they're ready to move on to a different concept, a different chapter, a different grade, perhaps. So whether it's international baccalaureate, whether it's advanced placement, there is an opportunity for all students. If a student is ready to move, that would be an example of an acceleration program to make sure they're getting what they need. Because we have students who they're in 5th grade, but technically they could perform at a 7th grade work level because of their knowledge, skills, and abilities. We have students who are in high school and are reading at a 5th grade level. And that's where the intervention needs to be a part of. So it's not, and I appreciate the question. I know exactly what you're getting. It's not as clearly defined, but it really depends on, it's a student by student situation, but we would be monitoring the grade level, or excuse me, the performance by demographic, by student group. And so we could at least share that information at the end of the year.
Right. And, one thing that I took out of Colleen Miller's training is she talks about, the more regular, like reports, even reports during the school year, you can identify that this goes towards, my goal 1, indicator 3, number 1, or whatever it is. We've put in this item, we've identified, like the high cap program. And so this is what we've done, or we've put in these supports. We've, added kingmakers to provide supports for our African-American male students who historically, need more help in our district. And then we can measure those things. So for me, just achieving the number, that's proficient. And so so when I look at a goal, where I think it's distinguished is like, where can we replicate it? Where could we even share it with someone else? So for distinguished, for me, it's not just a number, because, we might see a great increase for, our international baccalaureate students, but we might see a huge decline for, our EL students or something. And so, having that basis of knowledge to go, what was implemented, seeing, how that things were implemented. So even, we might achieve great increase in one area, but a huge decrease in another, or we might see great increase in many areas. And then that's, to me, distinguished because it's something we can replicate. It's a established system that worked. And, that's always the goal for our students, I think, is just being able to replicate results and support every student with equity, and, looking at what we're doing to support all our students. So that this goal is a little vague to me without, to measure it, I'd need to see, more like the high cap presentation, and then being able to follow up and say, oh, I see where, we increased, because, that's been the thing I've seen asked, and I know I asked, our high cap program is very white. And so, what are we doing to support all students who make sure that they all understand and know that they can participate in high cap and how they do that? Or, seeing changes in some of these programs that I think are problematic.
So I understand where you're headed, and one of the problems we had with the previous year's board goals, where we had so many indicators, was just for that reason. You know, we all had things that we wanted to see.
Right.
We wanted to see special ed, how that information is looked at. We have so many indicators that are very specific that we just couldn't keep up, and it was really difficult to gauge, you know, how well we did. But I do think it is something that could be. It's almost intimated here by saying support intervention and acceleration programs. So those are for our students
Right.
who need the necessary supports. So do we need to indicate that is special ed or our Black and brown children in there? Because I feel like, you know, if we see the performance of our students and we know the demographics and how they're, I mean, we have brilliant students who are Black and brown, and we have students who are struggling. So by the mere mention of saying implement and support intervention and acceleration programs, I believe we're covering,
Right.
you know, these are the
Everyone.
students with the greatest of needs.
Right.
Yeah.
I think what I can do,
Yeah.
I can so make sure that we're focusing on all students. What I typically would recommend is that we report on all students, which is it's an aggregate, right? It's all of our students. However, the story is in each individual group, and to make sure, and that's how we can report how are all of our students, but all isn't just all. All is what we refer to, that is, it means each and every student constitutes all. And so what's the story with all of our students? We know, so to that point, as Director Venkatachalam said, not all of our white students perform the same way. Not all of our Black students or brown students perform the same way, but it is a good indicator for us to know how they're performing. What we really need to take a close look at is how they're performing by school. And that's another area as well, because we have some of our schools where indicators such as free reduced price eligibility, or the amount of money in a family's bank account is now more of an indicator of student success than not because of the money and not because of where they live, but because of the access to resources that they have because of that money and because of where they live. But we also have prime examples of students who are outpacing other students, where indicators suggest that, well, to the question, well, how is that happening? It means that we have brilliant students all over our district. We need to make sure that we are giving them the opportunity to do so. And that's why I think whether it's graduation rate or whether it's assessment, our goal is to make sure that we have what I refer to as a high quality seat, no matter where our students attend. That was part of the conversation I heard. Director Venkatachalam, you heard as well from Mother Africa conversation this past weekend. Families who are dissatisfied. And I know it doesn't speak to everyone, but it does speak to some families, and because of their experiences. And some of our families who are of immigrant or refugee status, the reality is they're our parents, they're our families, they're our students, and we have to address their needs. So I have made myself a note. Yes, we're going to identify all students category, but make sure that the data, that to the extent that we can, is disaggregated, just as we would receive from the state or from OSPI.
So this is one of those things that during COVID, I'm echoing, sorry. During COVID, you know, we know that it's increased disparity, and it's increased some of the problems that we were already seeing. So is it unreasonable for this number 3 to just specifically focus on our students that need the most help this year? You know,
you're making an assumption though that you can identify demographically.
Yeah.
And that's not the
how I would
case.
do that.
Yeah.
So you can't do that.
Unless
Because it's a variety of students that are having problems. And I think I would say it may increase, but I think it's more exposed, some of the disparities that already existed.
Mhm.
Right.
And
But
so, but that's across all demographics. So if there are kids who are, kids of color, yes, but there's white kids too that are, I mean, it's just, there
we
are
have
kids who are,
homeless, but we have our, right
Correct.
now, our homeless students, our EL students, our inclusive ed students are struggling the most, so it's, I mean, for this number 3, is there a way maybe we just focus, on supports? If this goal is, if this measure is to identify, implement, and support, should we take an extra focus? Should this one take an extra focus? I'm asking, on our students that are struggling the most during this time.
I think that's what it says, to identify. So we're identifying the students that need the assistance, right?
But
And
this
implement.
is intervention and acceleration. So this is for
Yeah.
all, this is, I mean, I thought I just heard Dr. Watts say this is all students. And I'm saying,
Not all
Each,
students
he
are in the
said
same
each.
situation, though, right?
You're right.
Yeah,
Not everybody's
each-
right.
yeah,
Right.
each.
Because there are students who are excelling. And I
Right.
will say
I was
there's
gonna say, I've got one. I
Yeah,
mean,
absolutely.
doing amazing in this
Absolutely.
situation, much better than previously. So I think you have to look at each individual student as he's talking about. So I don't know, again, it's kind of hard to do a blanket, well, this is what we're doing for our homeless students, or this is, because they're all unique as well. So there's different situations that,
And
You
I
know.
don't know, we haven't gotten to all the goals, but some of that supports and I suspect would be covered under communication engagement.
Mhm.
And that's why I've included those in each of the 3. So from student achievement, which supports our primary goal, right? That's the reason why we're here as a
Mhm.
learning organization. And goal 2, or I'll if we're, I don't know if we're ready.
Sorry,
Okay,
yes.
that's all right. Goal 2, to increase student and stakeholder involvement and engagement. That was certainly a clear and present need for us. We have improved and increased opportunities, and we still have far to go. So the description is: superintendent seeks input from identified stakeholders. That includes all of us, families, individuals, groups, agencies, committees, organizations, to actively support and maintain school system environments that are safe, productive for student learning and quality teaching, and are monitored through a lens of racial equity. This also includes our equity leadership work, and is agreed upon by the governance team. The superintendent will. So these are the indicators. First goal, increasing stakeholder involvement and engagement. Indicators would be reports of stakeholder satisfaction surveys conducted by our district and shared with board. Development and implementation of a district-wide communications plan, or continuing that or modifying it as needed. Increasing diversity of opportunities for students and stakeholders to provide feedback. And provide regular, timely, relevant updates to board regarding district operations. And as I've shared, or you'll see towards the end, opportunities for you to evaluate. Obviously, we'll have a form for that, but I think that would be one of our topics for discussion each time we have our check-ins or evaluation pre-meetings before our final. I would provide examples and from your review of my weekly updates, or from examples from our one-on-one or two by one conversations. These are our opportunities for you to, and I would ask you just to if there's something that comes up, to note that, to keep that in as a topic for discussion, or a question, or a wondering, or an example of supporting evidence one way or the other. And that would be natural topics for us to discuss when we do meet. 2, or I'll stop there. Any questions or feedback for number 1? This would be more anecdotal records or documentation.
Yeah, just as long as we, again, I would want to see this, the surveys were the starting numbers for the survey. you know.
Absolutely. The data that supported to whom and by whom and
Yeah.
what did they say?
Yeah.
Or what were the common themes? And thought exchange does help us with that. And we're actually in the process now. We had a back to school task force meeting this afternoon before our meeting. One of the opportunities was to begin the student survey. We talked about this actually last night with our equity council meeting. So that is the next conversation. So now surveying our students and especially how they're doing under these circumstances. So we are engaging, continuing to engage a broader audience, especially our students. Number 2, recognize and protect the chain of command concept. And I say that just to really clarify what that means, that we all have a role and we all have a reporting relationship. Obviously, I report to you, the collective board. I have staff who report to me. And there are protocols that we follow so that it makes for a more effective and even more so a more efficient way of operating in a very complex organization called a school district, one of the most complex organizations I would imagine that are on the planet. Number one of the indicators is that my reports are shared with the board that demonstrate resolution of stakeholders' concerns following the established chain of command process. My most recent weekly update, and that evolves depending on the situation. That it just seemed to be, it's episodic sometimes, but it seems that there might be, moments during the year where there are more concerns that come about or come to you that I may need to, or staff may need to resolve. And I want to make sure that you're getting those and getting the resolutions. I do want to be very sincere. I think we can do a better job at letting you know that we are still working on it, but just know that it is not an intent to say that we're not and we don't care. What I think you may be realizing even more so that some of these issues that may involve other authorities like legal or the authorities such as the police or child protective services. It does take a little bit of time to get through those situations, and so I would be able to report to you through, if it's extremely confidential. Obviously, I wouldn't put it in a public forum, but to make sure that either way that you knew that there was a resolution. Number 2, completing revisions to and posting our chain of command or communication protocol. That's one we started with, and we still have not. That's just a reminder to us all. We have not completed that communication protocol. That's the document that is the PDF on our board agenda. And so that would be another opportunity for us to meet and complete. And number 3 is participating in a self-assessment of the governance team structure, which we've done, and that's an ongoing opportunity there regarding respective roles and responsibilities in governance decisions and recommending action plans which address appropriate findings or recommendation. So our work is part of my work, and that provides an opportunity for us to monitor and measure our collaborative work together, specifically regarding communication. Before I move to number 3, any questions, feedback, or thoughts? Okay. Number 3, increasing community involvement. Now, another asterisk, right? This is COVID environment. We know what community engagement now is pretty much the box. It's the cubes that we live in. It's the 2-dimensional meetings. It is not safe, nor would I want anyone to put themselves in harm's way to have an in-person meeting under these circumstances. So we have to look at community involvement in a different way. So making sure that we create systems where those who are outside of the organization can glean information from the inside through our website, and to make sure our website is updated on a regular basis, and that it provides the information that individuals need, the avenues to receive staff and community input, whether through thought exchange or through communication through email, and to share strategic communication and scorecard information. Now, what I mean by that is how we're doing. That's still a work in progress, but I fully expect that we'll have some form of a virtual scorecard that gives us an indication of how we're doing on certain areas of performance, whether it's academic, organizational effectiveness, or the like on our website.
So is that like the dashboard that the committee, when they presented in September 2018, there was going to be a dashboard?
We're getting closer. So yes, that is the plan. So number two, expanding partnerships with colleges, universities. That's going to be a challenge. That would have been in a normal year. Certainly our college, university, our teacher training organizations. We're now working with outside agencies that are partnering with universities, but our goal, so this is not only a community goal, but it's an equity goal, to increase our teacher training programs and our pipeline. We know, and we've said this before, we can diversify our teacher staff by creating a pipeline of teacher prep programs that support our high school students. We have high school students that I know right now who would love to come back and teach in Kent. The challenge has been we've focused primarily, not just Kent, but most school districts have focused on elementary school students. And if you ask a typical high school student, they're engaged and they say, when I get out of college, I want to come back and teach at my high school because that's their most recent experience. And we've not created a pipeline for that. I've had two recent conversations with organizations, College Spark Washington is one, and Danforth University of Washington is the other. We're in ongoing conversations now. I'll be meeting with Dr. Behringer and I and others to get more information on how we can create that pipeline for our students. Obviously, African-American male achievement, Kingmakers, and Project Mister are other examples of partnerships and community organizations that we are working to strengthen. Reports on the implementation of the strategic plan. So to our earlier conversation, and impacts related to COVID-19. I think that's also important for us to share. Because this is a different year, we also need to know what has been impacted because of COVID. And based on the data, we know that we may be, so what we've heard today in most recent meeting in KSD, there are still more questions. When are we planning to be in a normal situation? When will there be a vaccine? What we've heard is we probably won't hear more until the end of this year, possibly mid-year 21, 22. Things could change certainly, but a lot of it has to do with human behavior. And so we're hoping that we'll get some different news, but that's why I wanted to make sure, to our earlier conversations, I wanted to make sure we had an indicator that we can be responsible for monitoring that's specific to COVID-19.
Right. So, wait. So these, a lot of these are really hard to measure without, seeing, I can see the communication plan, and we can see how how it gets implemented. But like number 3, and then expand partnerships. I don't know what partnerships we have now, and the way you describe it is different than I read it. So if there's a way to add language that says that that's what it's for teacher prep, that will help, because if that's what the intent is, that's not clear to me when I first read it. And then understanding what we already have in place, just being able to see, again, measures I need,
That's one example. No, I appreciate that.
Yeah, a starting place. So we understand, a starting place, and then, so then you can see progress and see those expanded partnerships. So for these, they're not as even less clear than the previous one as far as, getting those measures in, because a lot of them I don't, it's a lot of starting place to go from and measure.
Well,
So-
if we know where we are, and we know what our current, so I wouldn't necessarily put that in this state. That would be in the performance or the data-driven, data-informed conversations.
Right.
So we can certainly start our end sizes. Let's say we have programs with 10 entities.
Right.
Ideally, if we were able to expand those, what would those particular agencies do? Who are they? So we can identify those, and that would be shared in the data itself. But the purpose of this is to increase community involvement, right?
Right.
And that,
So some of
that would be
these,
it.
so like that one, expand partnerships with colleges and universities, would that be something that we'd see at a board meeting, just a presentation? These are the current partnerships we have, and this is our teacher prep program pipeline. And so then we'd have that basis of information for when we were measuring it at the end of the year. Is that
that's one way that could be. I could certainly share that with you even more succinctly. But yes, I see where you're coming from, and I can make sure that there's clarity in starting point, implementation, and then evaluation.
Right. Yeah. Because honestly, there's a lot in this one, and to make sure this one is it's a big lift. There's a lot of different things in here, and some of them, I think it's important. It also goes to our goal of having more teachers that represent the diversity of our district. And if we can, and I've heard that talked about before, having that pipeline of students that become teachers, and then having that support network, and that can help even measure some other things about how persistent students are staying in college and things like that. So, I'm just trying to imagine how we would get all this information. It just seems to me that this is all information, especially this one goal with all its indicators, are things that would have to be shared out during the year to really be able to measure them mid-year and then at the end.
So I think there is some confusion there, Dr. Watts, when you presented that example of teacher partnership. I was wondering too, would that not fall under this goal 3?
Right.
And we do have presentations for professional development that comes up when we're talking about hiring, and it does go into the programs that they're in, the partnerships with our colleges and universities. But if this is specifically addressing racial equity and inclusion and not professional development, I guess it would be good to clarify that it's partnerships with these organizations for our educators as well as for our families and students, something to that effect.
No, I appreciate that, and forgive my I'll say overstating. It's certainly an example. The teacher preparation program is an example of community involvement, and yeah, I think you're spot on with the next goal. The reality is equity is going to be involved in each one of our goals. So not to confuse you, just to say that's one example of some, and I was giving an example of some of the conversations that I've had most recently regarding community involvement. And I would, and now that I think about it, it's really not just community involvement, it's also engagement as well, which is part of number 1. So that's something I've made a couple of notes on to make sure it's clarified and clear.
Are we moving into that situation where we have too many indicators? I don't know. Do you feel like these are all going to be something that you can present, Dr. Watts?
That's one of the reasons why I reduced from 4 goals to 3. I do think so. And so I have examples of each already, and these are all examples of programs or initiatives that we are currently working on. What I don't know is to what extent we will have those examples identified by end of year. So let me, to that point, I can certainly take a closer look. It might make sense to minimize, but I would need to see, let me take a closer look at that, but it sounds
Yeah.
like, I mean, I think it would be ideal to have fewer. I want to make sure that we're capturing.
Because essentially we're rating each one of these indicators within the goal. And something else when I think about community is, you know, we've had this year, you know, we've had a lot of surveys, and there's been, you know, at least once where the survey wasn't even completed and then a decision was made. And so when we talk about engagement, and, you know, we also have this situation with, you know, there's committees that haven't met for you know, because of COVID, but then even prior they hadn't met. And when we talk about community and stakeholder engagement, I don't see any kind of measures related. We ask a lot of, you know, we have a lot of surveys that we send out, and you know, you're gonna, if we're, you know, it's a social contract when you create a survey or when you ask people to engage in a committee or things like that. And I don't see any measure surrounding how we, you know, apply what we learn, and how we're, the satisfaction of the participation in the committee or the survey and things like that, because eventually people will stop participating in surveys if they feel like their engagement isn't wanted, or they won't join a committee if they feel like their you know, engagement it doesn't have any impact in any way. And I understand you can't make people happy all the time, but it's very good when you have a survey where you can point back to, we heard you loud and clear on X, Y, and Z, and we applied it. That makes people more likely to want to engage in a positive manner and participate. So I don't see any measure like that or acknowledgement of some of those committees or, you know, things
Are
like
you
that.
saying, so I just want to be clear, you're saying to a measure to show that we've recognized those who are responding to surveys?
Or
Or-
just what impact came from the survey. So like, for instance, when the decision was first made to go remote, to start the year remote, which every district did in the end, but we were in the midst of a survey, an open survey. And so I think I heard a lot of feedback that, you know, the survey hadn't even ended and the decision was made. And so it concerns me that that a decision was made, and it felt like to some people that the survey hadn't even had a chance to participate in the survey. And so I understand in the age of COVID, for that specific example, that sometimes it's health or it's a state mandate that changes how we have to behave. But in that instance, I didn't feel like there was any follow-up to say, you know, we made this decision and we understand the survey isn't closed and we thank you all who participated, but there were overriding things that precluded that. And I just get concerned because I've seen that happen, and with the graduation survey, and then we went to the 1.5, and I just feel like part of effective two-way communication is to, you know, take into account some of the ideas and to, you know, make certain that we are engaging the community and they really truly feel like they're being listened to. You know, I've had some concerns about that, especially in the last, probably since June or so. And again, committees too, like we've gotten so many emails from the Core 24 committee. And so, you know, we've literally, the CFAC, they've presented to us once, and then they asked us to allow more members, and they also have an open dashboard that has never been completed in addition to the strategic planning committee that in 2018 was going to have a dashboard. So I guess when we talk about community engagement, this is very dense. There's a lot of measures, but it's like, it seems to be, you know, like number one, increasing the stakeholder involvement and engagement. I don't see that people are responding back, that they're feeling like their engagement is being valued.
One thing that I might mention, Dr. Watts, that
Thank you both. Yes.
I found valuable sitting on the Covington BPAC, which is a budget priority committee, was that at the end of that, we presented a report, and then we presented a majority report, and we presented a minority report, which it seemed to be important to the people who had dedicated, 3 or 4 months to that project, that their point of view was expressed too. And I'm wondering if sometimes, because this is such a fast-paced environment, that we want to move forward, we want to make decisions, but I think just this is my opinion, in the Back to School Task Force, if we would have made a joint decision with some of our chairs that were involved in the Back to School Task Force, the superintendent, and the board to make announcements in a public meeting, it's more intentional. I'm sure it's not unintentional, but I think sometimes I've heard from a lot of community members that I've been on committees that they didn't feel like their opinions were valued. They didn't feel, and some of the emails I've gotten, they don't feel like their decisions were heard. And they could be of the minority opinions, but I'm wondering if just some type of impact indicator on the link from what they do to what is achieved, with more concrete linking on that. Like even when we go and visit, say we go out and visit a certain community and they bring up some ideas, have those ideas and then show the link of what became of those ideas. I just would like to see more intention on that. I don't know how we word that, but, and I'm not saying you're not trying your best to do it. It just doesn't seem to be obvious to a lot of our community to see that there's a big link there. And if anything, I've learned that it's just really important. I mean, some of the things that our volunteers are doing now in our city are incredible. And you don't see, they're doing wonderful things. And I try to tell them how much I value what they're doing, because quite frankly, I can't be out there with the public doing it, handing out food and stuff, but it's so important for them to feel like they're part of their community. They have that buy-in, that sweat equity that makes them part of the community.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. There's it seems like there's never enough time nor space and place. We do honor those individuals who served, like our 108 members on the Back to School Task Force. They continue. They're working now to continue that planning for hybrid. We had about 50-50 for those who wish to remain in remote learning, and those who wish to go into hybrid or in-person learning. And you've said it. And this is what I know. We're never going to please all, but I agree with you. There's always more effective communication, and I do agree. We can. There's some follow-up items that I think would be helpful, and so I've taken note of that. I've also taken note in that reducing some of the indicators here would be advisable. So
it's a lot.
I will. We'll work on that.
It would be hard I could visualize myself rating all these, and I think it could be kind of difficult in the end.
It may, if we have the supporting evidence is what I am, and that's part of. So this is what I share with people. Part of my role is to communicate up, down, and out, and that is as complex as any. And part of this role is So what I'm sharing with you, my next conversation is sharing with Executive Cabinet, the team that reports directly to me, to say, these are the data that we need to make sure that we're monitoring in our one-on-ones. I meet with them weekly. And so that's part of the data gathering conversation now. So I'll be doing some more work in the lab, and it's likely that these will be slightly reduced. If they are, as soon as this week or next, I'll make sure at least there's an update in my weekly to give you an indication, and welcome any feedback anytime. Thank you for those thoughts and context. It's helpful. Thank you, Maya. And goal 3. So this supports the work of our people business. So it's not just human resources, but it's every part of this organization involves people, right? We are to recruit, to hire, develop, retain a diverse and high-performing workforce. And so part of my role is serving as the overall supervisor of district employees. But again, I can't and would never want to do this work by myself. So we do have a part of the organization as human resources to effectively recruit, select, onboard, support, and retain a diverse and premier or high-performing staff to carry out the vision, mission, and core values of the organization. So that should be 1. I don't think I'm missing one. I'll have to double check that. First noted is providing high quality, relevant professional development for all staff. This was an area that I know I will say continue to make this a priority, because our goal is to make sure that all members of our organization are learning. Certainly our students, most importantly, our staff need to continue learning so that our students can learn at higher levels. Frontline is our current platform that we use to monitor and capture those who have participated in professional development. So that would be the measure of metrics where I could actually provide data of how many of our staff members have participated. And the goal would be that all of our staff members completed at least one, but ideally 1 or more course offerings. And through our leadership development, as well as our professional learning. Leadership development for our building level administrators, central office leaders, that's supported from our human resources community, and our professional development primarily for teachers, and that's really the line of demarcation, and also para educators. That portion of our professional learning is supported by teaching and learning community. So to improve district processes to attract and retain diverse and highly effective staff, we've found that we have some opportunities to get better. Obviously, when we look at our exit survey, our goal is obviously a report of exiting staff members completing an exit survey. So if and when someone does leave, that making sure that they are completing that survey, so we know why they left. Now, I think I've shared this before, Strengths Finder and the organization that started that, they typically don't conduct an exit survey when an individual has been, so 2 things can happen typically. An individual can separate from the organization, or an organization can separate from the individual. And so typically when an organization separates from an individual, typically there's a reason why, maybe performance or otherwise. Rarely does an organization do an exit survey asking, why did you leave? That typically is a known reason and doesn't add value to the data. But when an organization has an individual that has been performing at least at moderate levels and they leave, that's important for us to know. 2, increasing district retention rates. Ideally, the target is by increasing our retention, I should say, so that 5% would be the ideal. And 3rd, creating leadership pipeline, and that's the example of how we support retention as well. So providing opportunities, and that's what we're working on right now. It's an ongoing strategic conversation amongst several communities. It involves not only our staffing and making sure that our current salary schedule is aligned, and we are closer than we've ever been, but I can give you an example of how creating a career advancement pipeline has not been easy, because our salary schedule had essentially been out of alignment. In other words, there are leaders at the local school level and historically who have desired to gain a different duty or responsibility or a job supporting more students, maybe at the district level, but they had to make a business decision because they were actually earning more as a building principal than they would be at the position that they would be going into at the central office level. It would have been a natural succession plan and certainly a promotion in terms of duties and responsibilities, but our salary schedule was not aligned. We have since improved in that way, but we're not there yet. And so that's one of our opportunities, creating that leadership pipeline to make sure that that it makes sense from a local school to a district office level, but it also provides a retention strategy for those who wish to remain in the organization, but would like to perform a different role or responsibility. And certainly the diversity, equity, inclusion, otherwise when I say DEI, that's what those initials stand for. That's also the other strategy and performance of diversifying our workforce. The two most diverse employee groups, and it's not much different in any other school district that I've worked in, most diverse, care to guess?
Our educators.
And bus drivers or janitors, custodians, yeah.
So probably all of those somewhere, but number one, our most diverse is our custodial staff. When I meet, this is the first year, and that saddened me that COVID didn't give me the opportunity to, and I meet with every employee group at the beginning of the year. We have our business meeting, pep talk, and welcome back, and talking to our directors of first impressions and sharing breakfast at 5:30 in the morning with Maya, and we didn't get a chance to do that this year. But our custodial staff, when I meet with them, that's our most diverse employee group. Followed by a close second is our nutrition services, and bus drivers are probably third. We want to make sure that we are, and that's part of our challenge now in COVID, ironically enough, making sure we keep them. And that's what we're doing, being creative. We shared work program with meals, but that's part of our pipeline development, because we do have central office staff members who would like to work in different parts of the organization. And we have started giving them that opportunity to at least see what it could be. So I'll pause there for any comments, thoughts.
So do we have an external organization that does our exit surveys, or is it in-house?
We do it in-house.
Okay. And do you know what our percentage is now of exiting staff members completing an exit survey?
So, you know what? No, I don't know the exact number. I know it was, my understanding it was around, actually, we had a presentation last year. I can look that up, and I can't remember exactly, but last year I think it was the last time we presented. I'll have to find that and get that information to you.
Now, do you utilize that information in retention plans and the leadership pipeline?
I say not to the extent that we need to. I think if we gather the information from an anecdotal standpoint, that's probably the extent that I've seen it, but I don't see why we wouldn't. It would really depend on what we learned specifically.
Right.
But that's a good point.
So everyone's asked the same questions. Yeah.
Correct.
So, and what's our current retention rate?
It's a good question. So right
Probably
now,
depends on the
I have it,
groups.
we have it. I'll have to
That's okay.
research
So,
that as well.
Again,
Because-
so it's like, so if the target's 5%, you know, it's like, it's so 5% overall, then that
Yes.
probably means that we're higher than that right now. Because the lower the retention, the more effective the organization. It's a leading indicator of organizational effectiveness is, you know, a high retention rate. So you're saying increase the current retention rate by 5%. So if we have 80% retention rate right now, you would want it to be 85. But if
85.
we have like 50%, you'd want it to be 55.
Ideally, yes.
Yeah,
And
'cause
so,
we want-
and we have to
yeah.
be mindful that part of the conversation, that's what I'll be looking at when we take a look at the data. And I know that it was done in-house with individuals, and I know I did hear some, you know, there were some concerns with the process. I think we'll be able to tighten that up. The reality is sometimes retention can tell you a different story. And so an example is right now, retention is probably going to be much higher in some cases because of COVID, and going to be lower in some because of COVID. So we have to make sure that that's also a part of our context when we factor in those data.
Well, yeah. I mean, right now during COVID, it's if anyone moving during COVID, it's something to be watched because if we have, you know, depending, so the target is a 5% decrease then in our current retention. I'm sorry, 5%
It'll be
increase
5%. Well, it would be a decrease in attrition,
in people leaving,
right?
in
But
attrition.
yes,
So yeah,
right.
so if the rate is 80, then you want to be 85. So if the rate goes, you want a better retention rate. So so the concern is if it's worse than it was, especially in COVID. That's one of those measures that's, you know, if our retention is worse during COVID, then that's an interesting thing because a lot of people are, you know, it's a struggle to get a new job right now, as far as I'm understanding it from anecdotally from people. So,
Well, and I say that because there are a lot of school districts that have had to
lay off
employees because of that, and that's not where we've been, and which is a good thing. At the same time, we have to monitor that as well.
So
I'll
when
say we've had a lot of people leave because there were a
I
lot of
understand.
people when decided to leave because they early retirements and all
Absolutely.
those things because they did not want to work in the conditions
Absolutely.
of COVID.
Yeah.
So I think now this year would not be a good year to,
Yeah.
you know, that's because a lot of people have left.
Mm-hmm.
So, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Dr. Watts, I might have missed it, but what happened to did you cover that, our stay interviews? That was such a big thing the last couple of years, and we heard a lot of things through those stay interviews. Was there a reason you didn't put that in the...
No, not a reason at all. As a matter of fact, thank you for mentioning that. That's part of retention, and I can certainly keep that or include that as a metric or an indicator.
Yeah, I think those surveys, sometimes that seems to be much more informative than
It can be.
can be, yes,
Mhm.
than the exit survey. Yeah, at the exit point, people are unhappy for whatever reason, or they may just have better opportunities.
Yeah.
But a stay interview will help us understand why
They stay.
yes, why we do have a good retention rate. We have
Absolutely.
had in the past
Absolutely.
year. Really good. I think it was in the 90s from what I saw for educators, high 90s. So
There's not, I mean, to be honest, it's not, and I know, and I can get the exact number, but it's not been of concern, right? There have been situations where we've had individuals who've left under some circumstances that I'm not proud of, and certainly we wouldn't want to replicate. But overall, sometimes, well, I'll say this, we have situations where individuals do wish to leave and there are other opportunities. And sometimes we have situations where people have said this. They've actually said, maybe I've stayed too long. Because we have conversations now. I'm actually having HR take a look at the data for how do we predict what our hiring practices will be in a normal situation, right? We typically look at what are those who are eligible for retirement. We have to monitor those data. Not that they're going to retire, but if they are eligible, we have to be ready because they could leave us at any time. So those are all the factors that we take into account. But I appreciate I've noted that stay interview data.
Yes, I'm particularly concerned about our paraeducators. I see the paraeducators are leaving, and I don't know if the work is just becoming extremely difficult, and just in this COVID environment, and even prior, and it might not be a district issue. It might be something that the whole state is experiencing. I don't know, but it would be good for us to understand from them while they're here.
Yes.
What makes their job simpler or difficult.
It's hard, I will tell you, and it has been made even more challenging just from a technology typically, and then supporting students. And it depends whether it's general ed or supporting students who have needs for more direct services. It has been a challenge, and to Vice President Daniels, I understand when you say that. We did see or hear from individuals who said, this is not what I signed up for, right? The COVID environment, and it was completely understandable, especially those who were immunocompromised. We saw that as well.
So I have a question and kind of what I'm thinking about. So part of this, it talks about recruiting, hire, and develop a diverse and high performing workforce. I don't see anything in here about how we would increase our staff of color and our diverse staff. I don't see anything in there that mentions that, because I think and it's interesting because I also wonder about the exit survey and what questions are asked, because I do know times when it's challenging for folks to diversify staff, and a lot of time that has to do with the culture of buildings and the culture of workspaces, and so that's not, and I wonder about how that's addressed. So I guess there's a couple things in there that I think I would like to see with regards to, how are we using the data are we asking the questions about building cultures and building, because you hear from various staff members, right, about, what things are like in their buildings, and, what it's like sometimes being a person of color. And, we've heard from from KEA about the number of teachers of color on, that are placed on improvement plans and compared to the number of teachers of color that they have. So I just wonder, how are we using this information to address that? Because that is part of the goal. So how are we addressing those issues, or are we asking questions about work environments and building cultures with regards to, cultural relevance and cultural value and those types of things? And how are we addressing that?
I appreciate, first of all, that question, and I've just noted where that should be is in number 1. That's the space, and so forgive me. I will make sure that is there. That is a missing indicator.
Okay.
The reality is we do ask questions of those who are leaving. What I don't know is, are we asking those? And we should be, based on the beginning of our implicit bias training. Right. We should be asking those questions relative to, I will just call them more culturally responsive questions. And I've heard it from students. Most recently, I've heard it from staff members. I heard it from administrators.
It permeates the district. I mean, it's everywhere.
Absolutely.
So we know that.
So thank you for that catch too. And I do need to make sure that is updated.
And are they in person also? Sometimes if they're in person versus just a form they can fill out, sometimes people might not feel comfortable speaking speaking face to face with someone during an exit interview, but they'll feel more comfortable just completing a survey. So that's also another piece that I don't know if that they're face-to-face interviews or if they're, if it's a form they fill out and then submit. People are typically more, they might not feel comfortable saying certain things in front of someone
Right.
that they don't know well, but they might be more inclined to respond. So yeah, that would be good to have, is to see what questions are being asked. I agree.
And I'd also offer, and I appreciate that, we'll look at certainly the questions and offer a choice. So if you'd rather speak with someone individually, or how do we provide individuals with that power of choice? And then what are we doing with the information? That's what I want to make sure that I'm conversant, so I can make sure I follow up with you as well.
Yeah, Dr. Watson, I know in the past, Mariah, I've asked that question of Mariah and and even Dr. Beeman prior to that, what they said was that they automatically send some sort of a link when people are leaving.
Okay.
And if the individual wishes to have an exit interview, then they have an exit interview in person. Otherwise, it's a link. And I don't know if that's the most effective way.
Well,
but that's how it was done anyway.
Yeah. And again, I certainly want to do some more investigating on that as to why and what and how. What I do know is that if we did not, so on the intake, this is how all of our systems are aligned or misaligned, as the case may be. I know a practice that we provided that on the front end, if we didn't ask someone for their personal email, we would send the exit interview survey data, but guess where we sent it? If they had separated from the organization, we'd send it to their work email.
Yeah.
And they were no longer with us. So that was one catch that we said, okay, this is not, this is something that if we really want to hear from our individuals, we have to make sure that we're giving them a real opportunity to respond to us. So
yeah, some organizations even
that.
just give a piece of paper some organizations just give it on a physical piece of paper with a return, postage paid envelope. So they can remain anonymous even if they feel comfortable. And, if they don't feel comfortable filling out a survey, if they feel like they can be tracked to their email. So I know some organizations do that. It's just a paper based, so they can, even send back an anonymous feedback.
Right,
I mean,
right.
it's like if only one person leaves in a month, and then you get a survey back, well, then you probably know. But it gives one more, for some people, it gives one more layer of comfort.
Right. No, thank you. I appreciate that.
Dr. Watts,
Yes.
under goal 3, I'm going to go in a whole different direction, and I could be off base, but I'm pretty proactive in what I do. And I'm wondering because I've seen this work very well, my daughter, the teacher, has recruited and has now got, after 25 years of being in the profession, she has 5 young people that have gone in to the same job that she has. She has now 3 of them working in her district because as a teacher, and when they were students, she started implementing and showing them if they had an interest in that. She really helped them know where to go to school, what classes to take. She followed them after school. She wrote letters of recommendation for districts, but it started at the teacher relationship with student.
Like a mentorship program almost?
It's just something that I know my daughter's done. I know there are other teachers that probably do it too, but it's pretty interesting. I don't think we're starting, I don't think we start young enough with a lot of kids or students to see the opportunities. And of course, she looked for students that had a particular interest or desire, but didn't even know how to get those type of degrees, or where they could go, where they could get financial help. And I mean, she's done that with so many of her students, and I'm not saying she's wonderful. That's just my daughter. but she is wonderful because she's my daughter. But I'm just wondering if we're not missing out on, if we have teachers of color, administrators of color, if they are being if they totally realize the difference that they could make in their own district. I know it adds responsibilities to their jobs, but taking in people that ask them to come back, ask them to help them, ask them, show them the path, because some of this stuff with all these forms and all these colleges and stuff, it's really hard to navigate. And some kids have very little, adult help with all that.
Right.
And I'm just wondering I don't know how you do it, but it'd be like some kind of an academy of teachers helping students into professions. I don't know. But I've thought a lot about how that could make a difference in Kent if everything starts with relationships. And if you have that,
Mm-hmm.
and we have
Grow Your Own. You guys have a Grow Your Own program.
We
There
do.
are programs that exist like that Kent has.
Yeah, and that's what I shared earlier. That's the program that we have quite a few of our high school students who, because of recency, they had such a positive high school experience. They were thinking, hey, I'd love to come back and teach, but I want to teach high school. Well, our emphasis had been on focusing on elementary school, and that was not their passion.
Mm-hmm.
But I see that as it's a natural pipeline.
Yeah.
We can diversify our entire workforce in 4 years.
I mean, do we ever report on that, of actually what's happening, or how many are involved in that, or could we support that in some more ways as a district, or I don't know, have some incentives to that? I don't know.
I think so. I shared with you earlier 2 conversations I've had over the past 2 weeks. One is with College Spark Washington, who's focusing on diversifying teacher workforce, as well as building pipelines. They are working on some grant requests, and part of the discussion that we had is we have a shared interest, I'll say that. So ideally, and I've said this before, if we had a pipeline of just our own students at one of our most richly diverse high schools, in 4 years, we could begin diversifying our teacher workforce exponentially. I mean, it would not be such a heavy lift.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the challenge. And I will say this, our strategy before, this, it made sense. Different parts of the country have different population makeups. And so it made sense to recruit in the Southeast because we were recruiting for African-American candidates. It made sense to recruit in the Southwest because we were looking for a higher percentage of population of Spanish-speaking or Latino staff members. But the reality is we didn't have a retention or what I would call a plan. And that's what we began. One of our leaders, who's not with us now, but he was working on that. And that was a plan for what I call micro recruiting. And it's really the same thing, as my wife reminded me, right? When don't stop doing the things that you did to attract me when we were dating. And so that was the reality. And that's the same concept, right? Micro recruiting is what did we do? What did we say to you before you fell in love with this organization and decided to spend 80% of your week with us, right? And so that's part of our next step, is making sure that we create that care. And I will tell you, I can give an example. My wife wouldn't be ashamed of when she came here, we went to Safeway, she looked to see how many brands of grits that there were in the aisle.
Yeah.
I mean, that's real.
One? There probably wasn't even one.
There was 2.
Oh, there were 2.
There were 2, but that was real. And so what we found is that individuals who are coming from other parts, Washington is a beautiful place. And I've talked to people and they've also said, and I can say that because I'm from here, but they said, but it's not always friendly to everyone.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Not by any fault of our own. It's a cultural component. And what we found is that many of our African American and Latino and Latina staff members who were recruited from outside and communities of color in general were not feeling welcomed. And that's what we talked about. We called it the kind of like still in its infancy, but the care team. It's Kent actively recruiting, retaining, and welcoming our educators. And that's where we have to improve. And we certainly could use, we could use a more diverse workforce for our students, for our families, for all of our community.
Yeah.
I do appreciate you mentioning that, Dr. Watts. I don't know if everybody understands the extent of which, we went through that in Kent. We lost a lot of folks, and you talk to them specifically, they'll say it has nothing to do with leadership, but the way they felt coming to this city. And that's just a shame because they're brilliant. I can name one administrator in particular. I was so saddened she left. She went back all the way to the East Coast, and it was a huge loss for us.
Yes.
Yeah, that was an overwhelming feeling.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, it's gonna be very uncomfortable being a person of color in Kent.
Well, I appreciate that. So we've got work to do. I'm here to say I'm not afraid of the challenges that we have to face. We know that. I am proud of what we've been able to accomplish in the midst of this, but we have far to go. And this is just an indicator. So I appreciate, first of all, this is the way it's supposed to work, right? This is not a final draft, and it can't be. It's a work in progress. I've taken note of the improvements and the ideas that you have noted. And what I'll do is update and send this to the team as soon as humanly possible for additional feedback.
Yeah, and just one quick clarification. It says on number 2 indicator, number 1.2.1, maybe we can make that ABCD. 2.1 says increased participation in frontline sign-in, and the target is to complete one or more offerings. So I wanted to understand, I know we are offering the implicit bias training. That's mandatory, correct? So this is on top of the implicit bias training.
Well, anything that would be outside of what is required. Obviously, another example would be outside of, goodness, now the name escapes me. So obviously our implicit bias and our, goodness.
I thought implicit bias was only mandatory for new teachers, for new staff. It's not mandatory for all staff.
But and those who are on board, and that's really our introductory. So the reality is we will have a mandatory training. We're working on that now. That's not for everyone. You're absolutely right. But Safe Schools Online, for example, would not be one that we would count.
So we should probably specify that a little bit.
Well,
I was going to say professional development or professional learning.
Hopefully we have 100% attendance at all our mandatory trainings as well. But yes.
Do we? I don't know.
There aren't a lot of mandatory trainings.
We just had our Title IX. We did, and everyone who obviously needs to be there. But that's the reality. Our federal requirements.
And they're based on position sometimes.
Yes.
So there's things that some positions are required that other positions aren't. So
absolutely.
So the implicit bias is a requirement, right? For new folks.
Just new.
Yeah.
Once they sign on. Yeah. Correct.
How come just for new?
Well, it's part of our intro.
Right.
And so we have not made that mandatory for all, but that is something that I know we have obviously our focus is on not just implicit bias, but also racial equity. And that is something that we're going to ensure it's permeates throughout the entire organization. But we've not made implicit bias mandatory for all. It's not so I'll just share with you, it's not the same training, for example, that we're going to be a part of for those with ESD. This is it was really an introductory component. So it is something that's good for all to see, but it is not the full implicit bias training that I think you might be thinking of.
Mhm. So I know that that it was offered last year. It was offered in December as an optional, right? It was offered in December and I think March, and then March had to be canceled because of COVID. So has that been offered at least as an option for teachers?
Which one are you speaking of?
The
implicit-
introductory implicit bias? Because it was offered last year in December, like right as I turned on my computer in December, like on the 14th or something. It was a session that had occurred that day. So I missed it. And so then I was going to go to the one in March. And then because of COVID,
Right.
it didn't happen. So that
I'd have
is
to look
still,
into that.
is that still an offering though, as an optional? Because it was an optional for teachers who weren't brand new.
Well, so that, and I don't know if that was the same. We did have implicit bias training that was supported by WEA and KEA.
Right.
So there are some overlapping
Mhm.
PD sessions that may
Right.
have touched upon the same core principles. But
Right.
I don't know the answer to that question, Director Bettinger. And so with regard to, was it mandatory or has it been mandatory? Was that your, I just want to be clear, was that your question?
Yeah, well, no, the mandatory part, it was if it was an optional,
Okay.
if we were still offering that as an option for teachers. Like, we want basically this indicator 2 from goal 3,
Right.
number 1, increase participation in frontline sign-in, is implicit bias an option? Because this is just for optional trainings. Is implicit bias an option for our staff?
Yeah, I need to check on that. If it's the same training, I don't think that is the training
Okay.
that we provide for those who are just joining us
Mhm.
for the first of their introductory or onboarding.
Mm-hmm.
I just need to get some confirmation on that. I can
Yeah.
follow up with you. Thank you.
And then, but this principals all had that training. It was like a 3-day, like at the start of the 1920 school year, correct?
That was our leadership.
It wasn't all
Uh,
principals though, was it?
Well, our leadership training at the beginning of the year, that's our building level administrators and their leadership team.
Oh, okay. So they all took the coaching and leading for racial equity this course, or they
So-
took which one?
No, not this one. This was, so we had Malia.
Oh, okay.
She came and provided the presentation that she would have done at ESD.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that was 2019, right?
2019, 2020, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So that was our initial, that was our prior to, that was the same year. That's right. That was the day before talk, 2019.
Okay. So, but it only stayed at the building level administrators. That didn't fan outward.
So it could have, so Malia did offer her services, and I do know that some schools, so it was not a pervasive, what I mean by not every school, I don't believe every school sought out her services or partnered together, but she did provide similar training on a school by school basis as per their requests.
Okay.
Okay, well, that's all I have for you at this time, but it's not all we have to do. We know that.
So is there a plan to have the board as we finalize these? Because obviously we're after our discussion, there's going to be some changes. Are you open to us also after you send the next draft are we having another meeting, or would you prefer email back if we have any questions?
Well,
or
what makes
comments?
sense for the entire board?
Well, if there are significant changes, I think we should have another meeting. If we're talking about, minor changes here and there, wording changes, that's a different issue. You can bring that up at the dais and we can vote on it.
Absolutely.
Because we can't do it
Um,
via email, because that would be
Yeah.
a
Right.
violation.
No, I mean sending to the superintendent alone.
Even so, if we're engaging, it still would be considered, it could
Yeah.
be considered an OPMA because we're talking about the same subject.
Mhm.
But we would send it to Dr. Watts, or Karen, suggestions, but then you would discuss it at the dais.
Right.
You wouldn't discuss it by email.
No.
So I agree with Maya then. If there are significant changes, we'd need to probably talk about it in a different setting, because if everyone you know what I mean, it could be potentially,
There's a lot, yeah,
you
that,
know,
it could
yeah,
be 5 or
right. So I think
different
that's
6, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we could take a half an hour at another next meeting, to kind of see,
Mhm.
Yeah.
after Dr. Watts has updated this.
Yeah,
what
that
we wanna
sounds,
do.
Does that work?
Director Van de Gosselin, that sounds like a good idea to, give us some time to digest this and think about it. And if we have some suggestions, and
Mhm.
then we could overview, at the first part of another session. And if we find major changes or something, we might have to extend that. That sounds like a plan to me. And if it's just minor, I think we could probably go with it.
Now I know that the board has had a session with someone from WASTA for this process in 2018 and 19. Is there a plan to do that again this year? Since there are 3 new board directors. I mean, I attended the 18 and 19 session just as a citizen, but is there a plan for us to get some training as a team on
Well-
just making sure that we're doing this effectively?
President Ahmad, I know you and I talked, I'm sorry, go
No, go ahead.
Just-
please.
Go ahead, President Hamada, go ahead.
Yes, I had hoped to have somebody come in, but they're booked up for 2 months with, that, and I don't think would be very fair to Dr. Watts to put this off
Right.
that much longer to get this going. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to put something together on that,
Mhm.
Was this Trisha Lubach?
Yeah,
And-
Okay,
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And she,
With all due respect to WASDA, I do think they were helpful initially, when we talked about standard-spaced outcomes and so forth. But frankly speaking, if we're staying in with standard-spaced, last year we came up with our own goals, and we were not in agreement. But are we looking for a moderator, or because I didn't feel like WASDA added a whole lot in terms of the specific goals that the superintendent needed to meet, because they were also looking for a document, as I recall.
right.
And
Mhm.
we sort of came up with our own.
And they suggested we scale down a lot of the KPIs that we
Yeah.
had. And so,
Yeah.
Right.
And I've noted that as well. So you'll see and again, I attempt to do that with the goals, but I think, again, it needs a little more scaling down with the KPIs so that it's
Mhm.
achievable, right? And it makes sense, manageable within the time constraints. I would also offer this. I know that Trisha Lubach has her plate or buffet table pretty full. If we were looking for a facilitator, I think that would be a good investment. But I think we're pretty close, it sounds like,
right.
based on where we are. And if you'd allow me, I'll make the recommendations that I think I understood, make sure that you get these back to see if it makes sense first, and if it meets the standards that you and I would want for this process.
Yeah,
That
it's
sound like a
just
plan?
like I'm looking at this one, just create leadership pipeline for all employee groups to promote DEI opportunities. So it's like, just to measure that one, so is the intent that we would see a written plan? Like you would again, is that one of those that you would present? It would be presented as maybe from HR, the plan and how they were implementing it, and then each plan obviously would have a measure. Is that the intent with that goal or that indicator?
So the intent would be, so the leadership pipeline would show, ideally beyond a reasonable doubt, what are the pathways from starter position to
Right.
a career advancement opportunity throughout the organization. And ideally, the goal is to make sure that we are increasing diversity and equity and making sure there's inclusion. For example, the fact that we do not have, so of all of our building level principals, for example, from a diversity standpoint, we do not have a leader who reflects gender, male, race, ethnicity, African American, in the entire organization. And so same conversation, and we talk about this all around. All of our students, regardless of race, ethnicity, and gender, benefit from diversity. We need to see different people included in different roles and responsibilities. So part of our focus would be, if we can't recruit,
Right.
then we can develop, and that's how we diversify our work. That's one way. It's probably the most compelling way to do so.
Yeah, I just don't, again, with all these, it's best practice to have specific ways to measure, so it's not up to anything but the measure. Did we, increase our it's really easy when it's a percentage of something. Did 100% of staff participate? Yes or no? With that, again, it's just like to see a plan, or if that's part of the KPI. So mid-year, we would maybe see the plan, and then at the end of the year, we would evaluate the data. So, having those data points. So is that the intent, that, the plan will involve research and data that will be measured? Or again, with some of these, I just want to make sure that there's a very clear way to measure, if, and it's not, yeah. So if it's just creating the plan this year, then, and that's the goal, is to create the plan, then that's fine. But if it's to implement it or make any change this year, again, it's just making sure that the measures are very clear and specific.
Yeah, so I agree. And so some of these words we have to be really paying attention to, like create. If we're creating something new. It's not, we're creating additional opportunities. So I think that's what Dr. Watts has.
And we don't have, we do not have a leadership pipeline.
So yeah, so maybe it's like just changing the wording to create leadership pipeline plan, so that's specific, that it's, more, I mean, you either create the plan or you don't. And that's the measure, right? So I guess for that, just that specificity that just says this is, because then next year, that would be one of those that would flow over into the next year, hopefully, that would be, implement the leadership pipeline plan for all employees, right?
Let's see.
So do I hear you saying, Dr. Watts, that this is going to be outlined pretty clear in the next draft that we're going to receive?
Well, I can tell you it will be improved as a result of the feedback I received today and the clarity that I think that you will need, and that I've gained from this process. I can't say it will be finished, but it will be better than it is right now. That's all I can expect, right?
And I think, again, we can look at it again.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the beginning of another meeting. And if we need more time, we can take more time. This is certainly something that's very important. So
yes, thank you.
Do I hear a consensus that we're going to go with that? Is that give Dr. Watts a chance to send this back to us, and we have suggestions and see the amount of suggestions and discuss it again at a future date. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. Sounds
Perfect.
good. We're there.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate the feedback and the conversation and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Watts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right.
So that concludes our meeting, I guess. So I'm going to call our meeting to a close.
All right, take care, you guys.
Thank
Be
you.
safe. Take care.
Night.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.